Can you ever see Calvin Ridley being a number one?
What's up, Fackers? We are back with our Fantasy and Chill 101, counting down the top 101 fantasy football players for the 2020 season. Number 74 on the countdown is the wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons, Calvin Ridley. He is our 30th ranked wide receiver. Last year, he finished as wide receiver number 28. A few of his stats last year, he had 63 catches, 866 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Also added 2 carries for 34 yards. He scored 167.5 fantasy points, average of 12.9 points per game. All right, so he's going into his third year in the league. Had a little bit of a regression from his rookie year to last year. Had a better rookie year than he did year two. I put Falcons offense moving up because I feel like their offense should be a little bit better with the addition of Todd Gurley. Maybe get back to Falcons offense as we saw the beginning of Devontae Freeman, those sort of years. They're more of the high-powered offense than they have been the last few years. And he is slowly maybe carving into Julio's targets. We know he's the number 2 there. Julio's getting older, getting on the be hitting 30 either this year or getting pretty close to there. So he will slowly keep carving in to Julio's targets there. And like I said, we have him as our wide receiver number 30. We're probably talking about him. We might have him a little bit lower than some other people, but I consider him just a solid flex at this point. Maybe a wide receiver two, but I think there's just so many wide receivers that I would still consider him a flex at this point.
True. Okay. Can you ever see Calvin Ridley being a number one on a team? If Julio's gone and he's on the Falcons, is he a number one? Could he ever do that?
I think he
Um,
would be the number one
shown.
by default.
Well, I think he's not saying would he be, but could he be like
The guy.
just because you're the number like use the example last video. John Brown, he was the number one on the Bills last year, but he's not a number one receiver.
True.
Like
Okay.
Calvin Ridley, could he be that guy? I think he could. He's shown burst of that. So
Yes.
I mean, this could be the coming years because Julio's now 31, so he's not going to be
That's
this
true.
dominant forever. This is kind of when we see these older receivers start to slide off a little bit. I think Julio is probably a little different. He might be the exception to the rule, but at some point, Julio's going to start breaking down. And either they're going to have to draft someone else or Calvin Ridley's going to be that number one guy there.
Yes, and see, I think the Falcons realized what they had. They traded Mohamed Sanu, and Sanu was like a good role player, slot guy, but like I think they know what they had with Ridley. And ever since he was traded, Ridley's stats went up quite a bit towards the end of the year. I think he did take the last 3 games off, but he was, I think, what did he average? Probably 10 targets for the last 5, 6 games.
Well, funny you asked. After the Sanu trade, there's only after the Sanu trade and when Hooper was out, so that's freeing up a ton of targets because Hooper was injured a few games last year. Calvin Ridley was averaging 7.3 receptions, 10.6 targets, 106 yards per game, and had 2 touchdowns. That's in 3 games, so those are pretty good numbers. But still, Julio was playing in those games, so
Exactly.
he wasn't the number one really.
But
Now,
like Keller was saying, I do love Ridley as a flex. If Ridley's your flex, I'm happy.
yeah, I'd be happy with him at my flex. Now, as a wide receiver two, that's where you're kind of getting iffy there.
Yes.
I kind of like with the last few receivers we've talked about. If they're your wide receiver two, you might feel okay, but I just wouldn't be 100% confident. I'd rather him be a flex, like Britt said. And so we have him ranked as 74. He's gonna go. So that's an ADP in the 8th round. He'll go before that. We're a little low on him if you compare
Yeah,
just all the different rankings. We're a little low on. So you're talking about spending a probably like a 6th round pick if you want him.
And he does have a somewhat juicy schedule. A lot of his tougher games are at home. I mean, you play Tampa Bay
let's say you
twice,
got
you
you get
play
to
New
play Tampa
Orleans
twice.
twice. Yeah, I mean, you're gonna get some scoring, and I mean, they do have. I think they get to play Detroit at home, Carolina at home, Chicago at home, like Denver at home. Some of the tougher matchups are at home. So in the dome,
Yeah, no, that's true. You get
win
a
in
lot
the
of
dome.
dome games, which is good for offenses in general. I think the reason he's moving up so many draft boards is because people are seeing that Austin Hooper's gone, and Austin Hooper had an amazing year last year. That's freeing up 97 targets this year, but they're not like recognizing that Hayden Hurst is coming in, and I don't think he's a nobody. I think he was a first round draft pick as a tight end, and he's coming into an offense. Dirk Cutter's the offensive coordinator there. He made OJ Howard relevant in Tampa Bay, made Hooper relevant last year. Like, this is an offense that features the tight ends a lot. So when I first started looking at Calvin Ridley, I was kind of high on him, but then I started factoring these other things. I'm like, I don't know. I'm kind of lower on him than most.
But where you'll be able to get him last year in 13 games, he had almost 900 yards, 7 touchdowns. So you basically correlate that out to a 16 game season, 1,000 yards. We'll say 8 touchdowns. I'm pretty happy with that. Where you can get.
Yeah, I said flex worthy. Yeah.
Definitely a solid flex, like you said. I'm just keep going back to I just don't know how confident I would be as him as my number 2 receiver.
That's true. Okay, but hear me out on this also. Like last year, I thought the same thing with Godwin because Godwin was the number 2 to Evans. But then, like, when you have that number 1 across the field from you, it helps tremendously because the best corner always goes on
Oh, yeah.
Julio, and Ridley can explode. And I mean, this might be his year. We don't fucking know. You got Gurley behind the backfield now. Matty Ice is still decent. I mean, if their defense can stay healthy, Falcons should be a lot better team.
I think the Godwin is a pretty good comparison for what Ridley could turn into. I feel like they're similar.
The only thing is, Tampa Bay didn't have really a run game, and they had Jameis Winston, who would literally just throw the ball up and hope a receiver caught it. And I don't think Matt Ryan's going to be doing that as much. And they're probably going to feature Gurley more in Atlanta.
I will
Hey,
see
same-
what
same
Gurley
division.
still has in the tank, but I expect for Gurley to be heavily featured.
Yeah, so would you, for instance, as your wide receiver 2, would you rather have a guy like this where he's the obvious number 2 on his team? Or would you rather have like a number 1 wide receiver on their team, but it's not a as good team? I'm trying to, I can't, maybe like I say DJ Moore, but I
Courtland
think we'd all,
Sutton,
yes,
DJ Moore,
I think we'd all
Devontae
rather have the
Parker.
number 1, right?
About Debo Samuel.
Yeah, Debo might be a
See,
good
I think
comparison. Would you rather have Debo or Calvin Ridley?
I think I'm siding with Ridley in that one. I think I'm honestly coming around on him quite a bit.
Really?
They're pretty close.
I think I'd go
Those
with
2 guys.
Samuel.
Okay,
That's
Devontae
what you were
Parker or
talking about,
Calvin
though, the
Ridley?
number 1 on a better team.
Right,
But
yeah.
Okay, Parker or Ridley?
I think I'd rather have Parker.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. We kind of saw what Fitzpatrick can do to Parker when he actually gets the playing time.
That is true. But they're not going to be playing the Bengals every week either.
Parker was really
He
good
was a
last year.
monster. Yes, towards the end of the year, he was a monster. He was what everyone thought he should have been the last 3 or 4 years. But yeah,
This might be a good comparison. So, like, I know we already ranked this guy, but Edelman. He's the number 1
Okay.
right now, but you trust Stidham, like Calvin Ridley's the number 2, so I don't know.
exactly. That's my point. Who do you have throwing the ball to him? Because DJ Moore, who do you have? Teddy Bridgewater. Parker, you got Fitzpatrick, maybe to a Cortland Sutton. You got Drew Lock. Like, Matty Ice is obviously the best quarterback, hands down, thrown to this guy. So, does that factor in at all?
It does. There's a lot of factors that there's
Does,
too many.
but
There's too many to fit in a
the
10-minute video.
target share that Matt kept bringing up is the big.
Yeah.
But they got rid of Sanu too, and Hooper.
I
Yeah,
don't know.
but
It's going to be interesting. I expect, like, we have him as wide receiver 30. I wouldn't be surprised if he took a big step up this year and pushed for that top 15, 20 area.
He could easily be a wide receiver 1.
just are you willing to take that
Wide
risk?
receiver 2.
Did you
I
say,
guess
Matt?
I said, are you willing to take that risk? But I guess it's not really that big of a risk because if he does the same thing he did last year, then you might be okay with it with the round you're getting him in. Now, if he starts going higher and higher, then then you have to look at it.
1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns.
He was drafted in the 7th round last year.
By me.
By you.
Yeah, I might be okay with it.
If you look at my wide receiver draft from last year, I mean, besides Juju, I got Godwin, Woods, and Ridley. That was pretty decent for
Also
six.
drafted Both of the scrub Packer receivers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Allison and
Gotta-
Valdez-Scantling.
Got a double dip on that one.
Pay off.
Both fucking sucked.
I think
I
I,
don't think-
dropped them both by week 3.
He won't be doing that this year. I can guarantee you that. We'll
Alright,
see.
so, any other thoughts on Calvin Ridley here?
Nope.
Alright, so like I said, and kind of like how we agreed, solid flex. Good potential to be a solid wide receiver 2, but more thinking about a flex drafting in probably 6th, 7th round range. So Calvin Ridley, our 30th ranked wide receiver, number 74 overall.
We out.
We out.